I think it will take people, true patriots on both sides of the aisle, to say, enough of this nonsense. We should work together for the good of the people of the United States. Ruth Bader Ginsburg.
I don't like that man. I must get to know him more. Abraham Lincoln.
Good morning. My name is Betsy Heckman. I have been a history and government teacher at Westminster since 2004 and recently took on the role of Director of Studies. I live on campus with my two dogs, Bernie and Charlie. In September, I became an empty nester when my son, Augie, left home to attend Tabor Academy in Massachusetts as a 9th grader. Many of you may remember him as the tall, somewhat awkward boy who could be seen walking our dogs or eating randomly in the dining hall. He is an introverted, thoughtful, but quiet kid, as proven by his refusal to acknowledge even the Winslows when they badgered him relentlessly with, "Hi, Augie," for the past 3 years. Others of you may know him from your time at Henry James, the local middle school. As an only child and a single mom, we have always been quite close, sharing more with each other than might be typical for a mother and a son. He was the person I came home to and complained to about a hard day at work, and I had to field more than my fair share of puberty questions. While I'm a fairly public person, he is quite private. Therefore, the subject of this talk is not something that he would be happy about me sharing with you all. So if you do see him in the future, feel free to say hi, but it's probably best to not mention what I'm going to say here. Today is November 2nd, the day before the most controversial and tension-filled election in my lifetime, and potentially one of the most in US history. As a government and politics teacher, there are so many possible topics that I feel like I could have talked about today. Controversial elections in history, the 100th anniversary of women securing the right to vote, current concerns about our democratic institutions. These are just some of the thoughts and suggestions that I have had. To be honest, it has been quite difficult to decide what I would like to share with you. In 2012, on the day of that year's presidential election, I also gave a chapel talk. Most of that talk reflected concerns about apathy that seemed to be emerging in the wake of an increasingly polarized society. Well, I'm no longer concerned about apathy, but the divisions that were emerging then have become only more stark and entrenched and worrisome. We look around and see two sides, ours and theirs, blue and red, right and wrong. There is very little middle ground anymore, and very little understanding of and tolerance for the other side. While there have always been divisions in politics and different parties and perspectives, in fact, this is the point of democracy, expressing a range of opinions, having debates, and proposing different options for society. The degree to which these divisions have become exclusive is new, at least in my lifetime. Is democracy in danger in the United States like it is elsewhere around the world? I worry. How do democracies die in 2020? Not with a bang, but with a whimper. Not with a revolution or a coup, but when divisions become so great, people are willing to sacrifice democracy so that their side wins. While it feels like it has happened suddenly, this polarization has been developing for years, in part due to changes in political socialization prompted by the ever-increasing role of the internet and social media. Let me define this term that my AP students are quite familiar with, political socialization. It is the process by which we develop our political beliefs. There are many factors that influence what we believe: family, media, school, religious and interest groups, peers, just to name a few. Historically, the single biggest factor for at least the initial development of these beliefs was family. This influence, however, is shifting. It seems as though the internet and social media have become a principal agent in shaping our beliefs. This is particularly true for young people. As I have explained to my CompGov classes, this shift in which the internet and social media are equal, if not more important influences than family on socialization is remarkable and will likely have long-lasting consequences. Let me give you a concrete example of this change in political socialization. Growing up in the 1980s, my political beliefs were strongly determined by my parents. While I watched the news, my parents chose the channel on our family room TV. In fact, getting information was wholly different back then. The TV and maybe the radio were our devices. Even though cable TV was becoming a thing and CNN was available, most of us continued to rely on our tried and true network TV news stations. We were an NBC family, and I grew up watching Tom Brokaw every night with my parents. We trusted these news sources, and they projected an air of apolitical neutrality. Thus, in my childhood, exposure to viewpoints different from my parents was very limited. It was not until I went to college, far away from home, that I encountered beliefs significantly different from what I grew up around, and at that point began to develop my own belief system. Alternatively, for Augie, political socialization has been quite different. I did have significant influence on his early development. Whether it was in the car or taking a hike, he was eager to learn about history and politics, and I gave him my version of it. He bought into it wholeheartedly, just as I had done with my parents. Like many of you, however, when he gained access to the internet in middle school, my influence significantly diminished and became replaced by YouTube videos and interactions he was having online with friends. Over the last couple of years, Augie would often emerge from his man cave with new perspectives and many questions, some of which I respected and some of which honestly frightened me. We had many conversations about reliable sources and doing research, but it was hard to tell if what I was saying was sinking in. I was glad that he was developing his own belief system and not simply parroting what I had said in the past, but I pushed him to defend his ideas, and he was often able to do so. Most importantly, because we had always had such an open relationship, it was comforting that he was willing and eager to share his thoughts with me, even when he knew I would disagree with him. To me, maintaining this open dialogue was of paramount importance. Over the last 8 months, with COVID and quarantine, Augie spent more time online, like many of you and me, and increasingly our conversations became more heated. As protests began to erupt last spring and summer, our discussions became arguments. He started to ask questions such as, why am I a racist if I don't see race? Another one was, how is what people did centuries or decades ago my fault? And this final one, because I was born a white male, why do I have to be punished for the acts of others? I understood where these concerns were coming from, and I tried to address each one with history, reason, and evidence. My responses, however, seemed incapable of competing with the information he was accessing online. His views were diverging significantly from mine, and I honestly began to worry about what he was being exposed to. I did not know exactly what to do. While I questioned many of his sources, I did not want to start banning certain websites. I knew that would never work and would only push him farther away from me. I also didn't want to let the internet influences win. So I tried to expose him to some different viewpoints through books and videos, but our arguments only seemed to get more heated. One afternoon was particularly explosive and culminated with both of us standing in the kitchen, yelling at each other, and ultimately both of us in tears. He was on the defensive, fearful, and threatened, and I was feeling like I was failing as a mother and a teacher. How could I be a successful teacher of history, government, and politics if I couldn't reach my own son? Still, I didn't give up. I kept trying. I knew that Augie would soon leave for school, and I felt like I had to make an impact before he left to live with his dad and join a new community. Late in the summer, I had an idea. We often watch movies together, and I thought of one that might make an impact. It's an older film, but one that seems more relevant today than ever, American History X. I doubt many of you have heard of it. So in brief, the movie is set in California in the 1990s. It's about teenage white supremacists coming to terms with their belief systems. It has a number of well-known actors in it and is a highly acclaimed movie. It's raw and disturbing and violent. Throughout the viewing, Augie was quiet, which is not unusual. However, when it ended, he simply got up without saying a word and went to his room. I could tell he was upset, but I've learned that he will come to me when he is ready to talk, so I let him be. I didn't hear from him the rest of the night. I was concerned that the movie had the opposite effect that I had intended. Instead of making him question his beliefs and his sources of information, perhaps he was digging in even more, convinced of his ideas that worried me. After a quiet morning, he came to me the next afternoon and said, "Mom, I want to apologize." He went on to explain that he now understood that the things he had thought and said were offensive and wrong. He proceeded to show me two pages, single space, of writing that he had completed since the night before. He felt like he had to get his thoughts down on paper. He was apologetic and he was angry. He felt betrayed and that much of what he had been exposed to online had been lies. After watching the movie, he did more research on his own and found different sources than the ones he'd been relying on. He began to see different perspectives. He began to see where I was coming from, and to me, this was a breakthrough. Not because he now believed what I believed, because that wasn't necessarily the case. The breakthrough was that he understood the need to acknowledge different perspectives and to get out of his silo and look at a range of sources. The exclusivity of belief, hardened by social media, is what is at the core of why this country has become so divided. We no longer acknowledge that the other side has merit. We write it off immediately as wrong without any attempt to dig into the conversations. So often we don't make the effort to see things from different perspectives. Instead, we remain wedded to our interpretation, our facts, our sources. And the internet makes this incredibly easy to do. How many times have I heard, "I just can't be friends on Facebook anymore with my fill in the blank, friend, uncle, sister. Their posts just make me so angry." People on both sides have lost the desire to understand why we see things so differently. It's hard, it's frustrating, and it feels impossible. In this country, we are losing one another. These divisions feel like they are becoming permanent and intractable. However, this country will not function if this becomes the case. As Abraham Lincoln said, "A house divided against itself cannot stand." In his farewell address, President Obama reflected on this very issue. Here is a fairly lengthy excerpt from that speech. Quote, "If our democracy is to work in this increasingly diverse nation, then each one of us need to try to heed the advice of a great character in American fiction, Atticus Finch, who said, 'You never really understand a person until you consider things from his point of view, until you climb into his skin and walk around in it.' We have to pay attention and listen, and that's not easy to do. For too many of us, it's become safer to retreat into our own bubbles, whether in our neighborhoods or on college campuses or places of worship, or especially on our social media feeds, surrounded by people who look like us and share the same political outlook and never change our assumptions. The rise of naked partisanship and increasing economic and regional stratification, the splintering of our media into a channel for every taste, all this makes this great sorting seem natural, even inevitable. And increasingly, we become so secure in our bubbles that we start accepting only information, whether it's true or not, that fits our opinions, instead of basing our opinions on the evidence that is out there. But politics is a battle of ideas. That's how democracy was designed. In the course of a healthy debate, we prioritize different goals and the different means of reaching them. But without some common baseline of facts, without a willingness to admit new information and concede that your opponent might have a fair point and that science and reason matter, then we're going to keep talking past each other and will make common ground and compromise impossible. We weaken our ties when we allow our political dialogue to become so coarse with rancor that Americans with whom we disagree are seen not just as misguided, but as malevolent, end quote. Obama's words from almost 4 years ago seem more relevant than ever and need to be a wake-up call to all of us if we want this country and its people to endure as one. So what do we do? How do we overcome this division? How do we unite? My suggestion is that we must work to understand where each other is coming from. We have to take time to listen and hear people and what their concerns and fears are. We have to see these as valid and legitimate. We have to make the effort to have civil conversations. In some ways, we are already doing this at Westminster. 6 years ago, I, along with a group of politically precocious and divergent sixth formers, created Global Forum as a venue to discuss global issues and politics. Students are encouraged to research the topic and support their opinions, but importantly, they are encouraged to listen and hear one another. These discussions are at their best when their participants don't all agree and instead debate different perspectives and challenge each other to think critically. Just this week, I was trying to encourage my new third form advisees to attend Global Forum. They were hesitant because they claimed they wouldn't know what to say. Well, that's kind of the point. You don't necessarily have to say anything. All we are asking is for people to come and to listen. And I promise you, you'll eventually find your voice. Tomorrow, the entire student body is going to work on having civil conversations. The point is not to get everyone to agree, but to get everyone to hear one another, to not give up on each other. We are doing this because you, the Zoomers, are the ones who can save this country and the democratic process. I know this may sound extreme, and it is asking a lot. Your generation has had to deal with so much already. But in this moment of great dislocation is great opportunity. We can begin again, taking what is good and leaving behind what is bad. There is so much promise and potential in the ideas this country was founded upon. The ideas of freedom and equality can be realized. We cannot give up on them or each other. I would not be a teacher of history and government if I didn't believe in you, and this is why I do what I do. So I ask of you, today, tomorrow, in the weeks and months ahead, no matter what the electoral outcome, let's be sincere in our efforts to come together, to listen, and to begin again. Thank you.